Captain William Ironhand Carter was 300 meters below the surface when the sonar detected something impossible. A heartbeat, not from inside the submarine, but from outside, in the crushing darkness of the Pacific Ocean. What he found next would haunt him forever. The USS Phantom glided through the midnight waters like a steel ghost. Captain William Carter stood in the control room, his weathered hands gripping the periscope handles. His crew called him Ironhand, not because he was cruel, but because once he made a decision, nothing could bend it. It was March 1945. The war was ending, but Carter's war had just begun. "Sonar contact, Captain," called out Lieutenant Hayes, his voice tight with tension. Carter's gray eyes narrowed. "Coordinates? Bearing 270, range 3,000 yards. It's stationary, sir. Stationary. In the middle of the Pacific. That meant one thing, a trap or a wreck. All stop, silent running." Carter's voice was calm, but his pulse wasn't. The submarine went dark. Every man held his breath. In the deep, sound was death. One wrong move, one dropped wrench, and the enemy would know exactly where they were. But what Carter didn't know yet was that the enemy wasn't the biggest threat. The control room of the USS Phantom hummed with nervous energy. 23 men breathed in synchronized rhythm, each one aware that their survival depended on absolute silence. The red emergency lights cast eerie shadows across the instrument panels, making every face look like a skull. Carter studied the sonar display. The contact remained perfectly still, like it was waiting for them, like it knew they were coming. "Depth reading?" Carter asked quietly. 400 meters, sir. We're approaching the thermocline layer. The thermocline, where warm water met cold, where sonar signals bounced and scattered, where submarines could hide from detection, but also where the crushing pressure could turn a steel hull into a coffin in seconds. Petty Officer Marcus Webb approached Carter quietly. Webb was the youngest on the crew, barely 22, with hands that still shook when the depth charges fell. But there was something different about him tonight. His eyes held a strange mixture of fear and recognition, like he was seeing a ghost he'd been expecting. "Captain, permission to speak?" Carter nodded without looking away from the sonar screen. "Sir, I think I know what that contact is." Carter turned slowly, his full attention now on the young petty officer. "Go on." Webb swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in the red light. 6 months ago, the USS Seahawk went missing in this sector. Last transmission said they were being pursued by a Japanese destroyer. They went deep to escape. Too deep. The control room went silent. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Every submariner knew the Seahawk story. 73 men. Never recovered. The Navy had declared them lost with all hands. Victims of depth charges or mechanical failure. Their families had received folded flags and condolence letters. Their names had been added to the memorial wall at Pearl Harbor, but no one had ever found the wreckage. Until now. "You think that's the Seahawk down there?" Carter asked, his voice carefully neutral. "I think it might be, sir." Carter's jaw tightened. He could feel the weight of Webb's words settling over the control room like a shroud. But there was something else, something in Webb's eyes that looked like guilt, like a man confessing a sin he'd been carrying for too long. "Depth?" Carter asked the helmsman, breaking the tension. 350 meters, Captain. We're at crush depth." The hull groaned softly, as if reminding them of the 1,000,000 tons of water pressing against the steel. At this depth, a single rivet failure could cause a catastrophic implosion. The submarine would collapse faster than the human mind could register pain. Carter made a decision. "Take us down another 50 meters, slow and steady." "Sir," Hayes protested, his voice rising slightly, "if we go any deeper—" "I gave an order, Lieutenant." Hayes's mouth snapped shut. He'd served under Carter for 2 years, and he knew that tone. When the captain used that voice, there was no room for debate. The submarine groaned as it descended into darkness. The pressure gauges climbed. 360, 370, 380. Each meter felt like descending into hell itself, and that's when they heard it. A sound, faint, rhythmic, coming through the hull like a message from another world. Tap, 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 metal on metal. Deliberate, purposeful. What the hell is that? whispered Hayes, his earlier confidence evaporating. Carter pressed his ear against the cold steel wall. The tapping continued, measured and patient. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. Morse code. SOS. "Someone's alive down there," breathed Webb, his face going pale. Carter's mind raced through the possibilities. The Seahawk went down 6 months ago. No one could survive that long in a submerged submarine. No food, no water, limited oxygen. Even if they'd managed to seal off a compartment, even if they'd rationed everything perfectly, the math didn't work. Human beings simply couldn't survive 6 months in a steel tomb at the bottom of the ocean. It was impossible. But the tapping continued, insistent and undeniable. "Sir, we need to surface. We need to report this," Hayes urged, his training warring with his instincts. Carter looked at his second-in-command. Hayes was a good officer, by the book, reliable, the kind of man who followed orders without question, but he'd never lost anyone in the deep. He'd never felt the guilt of leaving brothers behind. "And tell them what?" Carter asked quietly. "That we heard ghosts." "It's not a ghost, Captain. Someone is alive." Carter turned to face his crew. 23 faces stared back at him, some frightened, some curious, all waiting for his command. These were good men, young men, most of them barely old enough to shave. They'd signed up for adventure, for patriotism, for the chance to serve their country. They hadn't signed up for this, but Carter had. The moment he'd accepted command of the Phantom, he'd accepted responsibility for every decision, every risk, every consequence. "We're going to investigate," he announced. "Prepare the diving suits. Webb, you're with me." "Captain, that's suicide," Hayes said flatly. "The pressure at this depth will crush those suits in minutes. The joints aren't rated for—" "I know the risks, Lieutenant, but if there's even a chance someone's alive—" Carter paused, letting his words hang in the air. "We're not leaving them down here." What Carter didn't tell them was that he had another reason for going down there. A personal reason. A reason that had kept him awake for 6 months, staring at photographs in the darkness of his quarters. A reason that made his hands shake when he thought about it too long. A reason named Michael. Michael Carter. His younger brother, the captain of the USS Seahawk. The airlock hissed open with a sound like escaping souls. Carter and Webb stepped into the cramped chamber, their diving suits heavy and restrictive. The thick canvas and rubber felt like burial shrouds. The pressure gauges on their chests glowed faintly in the darkness, tiny circles of green light that seemed absurdly fragile against the crushing deep. "Check your seals," Carter ordered, his voice muffled by the helmet. Webb's hands fumbled with the clasps. "Captain, I need to tell you something before we go out there." "It can wait." "No, sir. It can't." Carter looked at the young man through the faceplate. Webb's eyes were wide with something beyond fear. It was terror mixed with relief, the look of a man finally ready to confess. "When we get back," Carter said firmly. "Right now, I need you focused." "Yes, sir." Carter reached for the pressure valve. "Equalize pressure." The chamber flooded with icy water. It rushed in like a living thing, hungry and cold. Carter's ears popped painfully. The pressure built against his chest, making every breath a conscious effort. The cold bit through the suit like knives, finding every gap, every weakness. The outer hatch opened with a mechanical clunk that reverberated through the water. Darkness. Absolute and complete. A darkness so thick it felt solid, like swimming through ink. Carter switched on his helmet light. The beam cut through the murky water, revealing nothing but particles of sediment floating like snow in a nightmare. The light only penetrated about 15 feet before being swallowed by the void. But it was enough. He could see the edge of something massive, a shape that didn't belong in nature. Man-made, angular, dead. And then he saw it fully. The USS Seahawk. She lay on her side like a dying whale, her hull cracked open like an eggshell. The conning tower was bent at an unnatural angle, testament to whatever catastrophe had brought her down. Debris scattered for hundreds of yards. Personal effects, equipment, pieces of lives interrupted. But the control room section, it looked intact. Carter's heart hammered in his chest so hard he thought the suit would burst, because he knew who the captain of the Seahawk had been. He knew that somewhere in that wreckage was his brother's body, still at his post, still doing his duty even in death. Michael. Little Michael who'd followed him into the Navy. Michael who'd always tried to be as good as his older brother. Michael who'd earned his own command at just 28 years old. Michael who'd died alone in the dark. They swam closer, their movements slow and dreamlike in the heavy suits. The tapping grew louder, more desperate, echoing through the water like a heartbeat. Webb pointed to a hatch on the Seahawk's hull. It was sealed shut, but vibrating with each tap from inside. Carter reached it first. He pressed his gloved hand against the metal. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. The kind of silence that exists at the bottom of the ocean, a silence so complete it felt like the absence of existence itself. Then slowly, deliberately, 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. Someone was responding. Someone was alive. "We need to open it," Webb said through the radio, his voice distorted by static. "If we open that hatch, the pressure differential will—" "I know, Captain. But we didn't come all this way to leave them." Carter studied the hatch. His engineering mind calculated the risks automatically. The explosive decompression, the rushing water, the chances of survival for whoever was inside. 0.01%. But the tapping continued. Desperate, pleading, human. Carter made his choice. He began working the manual release wheel, his gloved hands struggling with the corroded metal. And that's when Webb said something that changed everything. "Captain, I need to tell you something about your brother." Carter froze, his hands still on the wheel. "What about Michael?" Webb's voice cracked. "I was on the Seahawk, sir. 6 months ago. I'm the only survivor." Time stopped. The ocean itself seemed to hold its breath. Carter's blood turned to ice colder than the water surrounding them. "What did you say?" "I escaped 6 months ago, Captain, through the torpedo tubes, but I left them behind. All of them, including your brother." The tapping inside the Seahawk grew frantic, louder, angrier, like whatever was inside knew it was being talked about, like it had been waiting for this confession. "You left them?" Carter's voice was deadly quiet, more terrifying than any shout. "I had to, sir. The oxygen was running out. The hull was cracking. Someone had to survive to tell their story. Your brother, Captain Carter, he ordered me to go. He gave me his oxygen tank. The crew gave me their rations. They wanted me to live." Carter's hand moved to his diving knife, fingers wrapping around the handle. The weight of betrayal crushed him harder than the ocean pressure ever could. "My brother was in there. 72 other men were in there. And you left them to die in the dark. Captain, please, you have to understand." "I understand perfectly. You're a coward. I tried to get help. I reported the position to command, but they said it was too deep, too dangerous, that a rescue was impossible. So you joined my crew. You've been serving under me for 6 months, knowing that my brother died down here, knowing that I spent every night wondering if he suffered. And you never said a word." Webb was backing away now, his movements clumsy in the bulky suit. "I wanted to tell you. Every day I wanted to tell you. But I was afraid." "You were afraid," Carter repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. "While my brother was dying down here, while he was using his last breaths to give you his oxygen, you were afraid." But before Webb could respond, the hatch exploded outward. Water erupted from the Seahawk like a geyser, a column of force that had been building pressure for 6 months. Carter was thrown backward, tumbling through the darkness like a leaf in a storm. His helmet light spun wildly, casting crazy shadows that made the ocean look alive. When he stabilized, when he finally managed to right himself, he saw it, a figure, floating out of the Seahawk in a cloud of disturbed sediment, wearing a tattered diving suit, moving toward them with slow, deliberate strokes. "Carter!" Webb's voice was pure terror. That's impossible." The figure's helmet light flickered on. Through the cracked faceplate, Carter saw a face he would recognize anywhere, in any condition, in any nightmare. Gaunt, pale, eyes sunken deep in their sockets. Skin stretched tight over bone like parchment, but alive. Impossibly, inexplicably alive. Michael Carter, his brother. But something was fundamentally wrong. Michael's movements were jerky, mechanical, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. His eyes didn't blink. When his mouth opened, no sound came out, only bubbles rising toward the distant, unreachable surface. "Michael!" Carter's voice broke, years of military discipline shattering in an instant. His brother raised one skeletal hand and pointed, not at Carter, at Webb. The gesture was accusing, condemning. Then Michael's other hand emerged from behind his back. He was holding something, a logbook, the Seahawk's captain's log, its waterproof case somehow still intact after 6 months in the abyss. He held it out to Carter with trembling fingers. Carter took it, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. The case was sealed with rubber gaskets, designed to survive anything. He opened it with numb fingers and shone his light on the pages inside. The entries were written in Michael's precise handwriting, each letter perfectly formed, even as the situation deteriorated. Carter's eyes scanned the pages, seeing the story of the Seahawk's final days unfold. March 13th, 1945. Day 1 of entrapment. Japanese destroyer above us. Dropped 70 depth charges, hull cracked in 3 places. Flooding in torpedo room and engine room. Sealed them off. Lost 16 men. We're at 380 meters. Too deep for rescue. Oxygen estimated at 72 hours. March 14th, 1945, Day 2. Oxygen at 40%. Had to make a decision. Selected Petty Officer Webb for escape attempt. He's the youngest, the smallest, the only one who might fit through torpedo tube 3. We're giving him everything. Our oxygen, our rations, our chance. He has to survive. He has to tell our families what happened. He has to tell William, "I'm sorry." March 15th, 1945. Day 3. Oxygen at 12%. Webb has volunteered to attempt escape through torpedo tube 3. Actually, that's a lie. We ordered him. He didn't want to leave. Good kid. Brave. But someone has to survive this. Someone has to tell the truth. If he makes it, he must tell them we went down fighting. If he doesn't, God help us all. Captain M. Carter. Carter's world shattered. The ocean around him seemed to dissolve, leaving him floating in a void of betrayal and grief and rage. "You had their oxygen," he whispered, looking up from the logbook to stare at Webb. "They sent you out with their last chance at survival. They sacrificed themselves for you." Webb was backing away, his breathing rapid and panicked through the radio. "I didn't ask for it. They forced me to take it. Your brother ordered me. And you let me believe you'd send help. You let me believe my brother died because the Navy abandoned him. But the truth is, they died so you could live. And you wasted that gift on lies and cowardice. I tried. I swear I tried. But Command said it was too dangerous. So instead of pushing back, instead of demanding they try, you just, what? Joined another crew, pretended it never happened, went on living while 73 men rotted down here?" Webb's helmet light was shaking violently now. "Captain, I was young. I was scared. Michael Carter moved closer. His skeletal hand reached out, almost gently, and touched Webb's helmet. And then, impossibly, they heard it, a voice, thin, hollow, coming not through the radio but through the water itself, as if the ocean had learned to speak. Tell them we waited," Webb screamed. It was a sound of pure animal terror, the kind of scream that comes from the primitive part of the brain that knows it's facing something that shouldn't exist. He kicked hard, propelling himself away from Michael, away from the Seahawk, swimming desperately toward the USS Phantom. But Carter didn't move. He couldn't. He was frozen, staring at his brother's ghostly form. "Michael, I'm sorry. I should have looked for you sooner. I should have demanded they search. I should have—" His brother's head tilted. The hollow eyes seemed to soften. Then Michael pointed again, this time back toward the Seahawk's open hatch. Carter understood. "There are others?" A nod. Slow, deliberate. The movement of something that had waited 6 months to be found. Carter's training screamed at him to surface, to get away, to save himself. His oxygen gauge showed 12 minutes remaining. 12 minutes between life and death. But his heart, his iron heart that never bent, that never broke, made a different choice. "I'll bring them home, Michael. All of them. I promise you that. Every single man." His brother's form began to fade. The helmet light dimmed. The tattered suit collapsed in on itself like it was empty, like it had always been empty, and then Michael Carter was gone, dissolving into the dark water like he'd never been there at all, like he'd been nothing but a hallucination born of pressure and grief. But the logbook in Carter's hands was real. The weight of it was real. The words were real. Carter turned back to the Seahawk. He swam to the open hatch and peered inside, shining his light into the darkness. The control room was a tomb. Bodies still at their stations, hands frozen on controls they'd never release. The crew of the Seahawk had died at their posts, maintaining discipline and order even as the oxygen ran out and the cold crept in. Carter recognized some of the faces from photographs Michael had sent home. Young men with their whole lives ahead of them. Now they were monuments to duty and sacrifice. But there was something else, something pinned to the wall with a knife. Carter carefully pulled himself into the Seahawk, his movements slow and reverent. This wasn't just a wreck. It was a cathedral, a place where men had faced death with courage and grace. He reached the chart and pulled it free, examining it under his light. It was a detailed map of this sector, with coordinates marked in Michael's precise handwriting. Coordinates of a Japanese supply convoy. The same convoy Carter had been ordered to intercept. But there were additional notations, warnings. Michael had discovered something before he died. A note was scrawled at the bottom in increasingly shaky handwriting. Trap, minefield at bearing 090. We discovered it by accident. Sonar picked up the magnetic signatures. Tried to warn Pearl Harbor, but comms were damaged. Fleet is heading straight into it. 3,000 men on those ships. Someone has to warn them. If you're reading this, please, save them. Don't let our deaths be meaningless. MC Carter's breath caught. Michael had died trying to save a convoy. He'd spent his final hours documenting the minefield, hoping against hope that someone would find his warning. And now, 6 months later, his warning had reached the only person who could use it, his brother. Carter carefully folded the chart and secured it in his suit. He took one last look at the Seahawk's crew, brave men who'd given everything so one person could survive, and who'd used their last moments trying to save others. Rest easy, he whispered. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. I swear it. He swam back toward the USS Phantom. Above him, he could see the dark silhouette of his submarine. Webb had already reached the airlock. Carter could see the outer hatch cycling, but as Carter approached, something was wrong. The Phantom was rising, fast, too fast. Hayes, this is Carter. Why are we ascending? Static crackled through his helmet speakers. Hayes, respond. More static. Then finally, Hayes's voice came through, tight with tension. Captain, Webb sealed you out of the airlock. He's telling the crew you went mad down there. He says you attacked him. He's showing them a knife wound in his suit. He's taken command, sir. Carter's blood ran cold. His oxygen gauge read 10 minutes. Hayes, listen to me carefully. Webb is lying. I have evidence. Sir, he's very convincing. He says you blamed him for your brother's death. He says you tried to kill him to hide the fact that you sabotaged the Seahawk mission 6 months ago, that you're the reason they went too deep. That's insane. Hayes, you know me. You've served with me for 2 years. I want to believe you, Captain. God knows I do. But he has a knife wound. He has blood in his suit. And the crew, they're scared. Half of them think the Seahawk is cursed. They saw something come out of that wreck. They want to surface and leave this place and never come back. Carter watched helplessly as his submarine continued to rise, leaving him alone in the darkness. His crew, men he'd trained, men he'd protected, men he'd trusted, were abandoning him based on the word of a coward. His oxygen gauge blinked. 8 minutes remaining, not enough to reach the surface, not at this depth, not with the limited tank capacity. This is how it ends, he thought, alone in the deep. Like Michael, maybe that was justice. Maybe he deserved this for not looking harder, for not questioning the official story, for accepting his brother's death without demanding answers. But then he remembered the chart in his suit, the convoy coordinates, the minefield warning. If he died here, that information died with him. 3,000 sailors would sail into a trap. 3,000 families would receive folded flags and condolence letters. 3,000 names would be added to memorial walls. He couldn't let that happen. His brother had died, trying to prevent it. The Seahawk's crew had sacrificed everything to document it. Carter wasn't going to let their deaths be meaningless. He activated his emergency beacon. It wouldn't reach the surface. The water was too deep, the signal too weak. But it would reach the Phantom's hull, a continuous ping that would drive the sonar operator crazy, that would leave a trail, that would mark this spot. Then he did something that went against every survival instinct he had, every lesson he'd learned in 20 years of naval service. He swam deeper, back toward the Seahawk, back toward his brother's grave, back toward the one chance he had left. Because there was one thing every submariner knew about the Seahawk. She'd been carrying experimental communication equipment. Long-range radio designed by the Navy's brightest engineers. Equipment that could penetrate water, that would block normal transmissions. Equipment that could reach Pearl Harbor directly. If it still worked, if by some miracle it had power after 6 months, he could send a message. Not to the Phantom. They'd already betrayed him, but to command. To someone who could warn the convoy. His oxygen gauge read 6 minutes as he reached the Seahawk's communication room. The door was jammed, warped by pressure and corrosion. He wedged his knife into the seal in pride. Metal shrieked. The door gave way. Inside, the equipment was dark, dead, covered in a thin layer of sediment and marine growth. 5 minutes of oxygen. Carter's hands moved on autopilot, years of training taking over where conscious thought failed. He traced the power cables with his gloved fingers, looking for breaks in the circuit. Found 3. Bypassed them with wire from his emergency toolkit. Nothing. The equipment remained dark. 4 minutes. He checked the backup batteries. Dead. Completely drained. But the Seahawk had been running on emergency power when she sank. That meant the reactor might still... Carter swam toward the reactor room, his movements growing sluggish as his oxygen depleted. His lungs burned. Every breath was a conscious effort now. The reactor room door was sealed with multiple locks and a radiation warning. After 6 months, the radiation levels would be catastrophic, lethal. But he was already dead. His oxygen would run out long before radiation poisoning could kill him. 3 minutes. He forced the door open. His radiation badge immediately turned black, a warning that he was being exposed to enough radiation to kill him several times over. But inside, something miraculous. The reactor core still glowed faintly. Impossibly, inexplicably, it was still generating power. Not much, just a trickle. But maybe, just maybe, enough. 2 minutes. Carter's hands fumbled with the power cables. His vision was blurring. His body was shutting down. But he managed to reroute the reactor's output to the communication system. He swam back to the radio room, each movement feeling like swimming through concrete. His lungs screamed for air that wasn't there. 1 minute. He flipped the power switch. The lights flickered. Weak, dying, but alive. Carter grabbed the microphone with shaking hands and pressed the transmit button. "This is Captain William Carter, USS Phantom. Emergency transmission." Each word was agony. "Convoy route. Compromised. Minefield at bearing 090. Repeat. Minefield at 090. Alternate route 045. His vision went dark at the edges. "This is my final transmission." He repeated the message twice more, his voice fading to a whisper. Then his hands fell from the controls. 30 seconds of oxygen. Carter's lungs began to burn with a fire that consumed everything else. The instinct to breathe was overwhelming, irresistible. His hands clawed at his helmet, trying to remove it, trying to let in air even though there was no air to breathe. 15 seconds. His vision tunneled. The world became a pinpoint of light in an ocean of darkness. This was it. This was death. But as darkness closed in, he felt something. A hand on his shoulder. Warm. Solid, real. He turned his head, an action that took every ounce of willpower he had left, and saw him. Michael. Not the skeletal ghost from before, but Michael as he remembered him. Young, strong, healthy, smiling that crooked smile that had always made their mother laugh. You kept your promise, little brother. Carter tried to speak, but no words came. No air left to form them. Michael's smile widened, and suddenly Carter could see others behind him. The entire crew of the Seahawk standing in the water like it was air, all of them smiling, all of them at peace. The message got through, Michael said. Pearl Harbor received it. The convoy changed course. You saved them, William. You saved all of them. 5 seconds. Webb, Carter managed to whisper with the last molecule of oxygen in his lungs. Hayes figured it out. Smart man, that Hayes. He found your knife, the one you left in the Seahawk's chart room, the knife with Michael Carter's name engraved on it. The knife you said Michael gave you before his final mission. Webb couldn't explain how it got there unless you'd actually been inside the Seahawk. His story fell apart. Carter's vision was completely black now. He couldn't feel his hands, couldn't feel the cold, couldn't feel anything except Michael's hand on his shoulder. I couldn't save you, he whispered into the darkness. You did something better. Michael's voice was fading now, growing distant. You gave our deaths meaning. Every man on the Seahawk died knowing we'd tried to save others, and now you've proven we succeeded. That's all any sailor can ask for. 0 seconds. Carter felt himself drifting, not sinking, but rising, like the weight of the ocean was releasing him, like the deep itself was letting him go. Now it's time to rest, brother. Not yet, said another voice. Different, urgent, real. Carter felt hands, actual, physical hands, grabbing his suit, pulling him, moving him through water that suddenly felt less like water and more like liquid light. He heard the hiss of an airlock, felt himself being dragged across metal. A helmet was ripped from his head. Air rushed into his lungs, painful, burning, more beautiful than anything he'd ever experienced. He coughed, water spilling from his mouth and nose. Hayes's face appeared above him, saying something Carter couldn't quite hear over the roaring in his ears. Breathe, Captain. Just breathe. You're safe. You're home. How? Carter gasped, each word an agony and a miracle. Your beacon. We tracked it. Took us 40 minutes to convince the crew that Webb was lying, but once we showed them the evidence... Hayes held up a pair of handcuffs. He's secured now, awaiting court-martial. Carter coughed again, his lungs clearing. The message, did it reach? Hayes grinned, actually grinned. We received confirmation from Pearl Harbor 20 minutes ago. The convoy changed course at 200 hours. You saved over 3,000 men, Captain. Carter closed his eyes. The weight of 6 months lifted from his chest like a physical thing being removed. And sir, Hayes added quietly, his voice full of respect. Command wants to send a recovery team for the Seahawk. They're calling it a salvage operation, but we all know it's really a funeral. The crew will come home. All of them. Good. Carter's voice was hoarse but firm. They deserve to come home. They deserve to be honored for what they did. 3 weeks later, Captain William Carter stood on the deck of the USS Phantom as it sailed into Pearl Harbor. The crew lined the rails in dress uniforms, standing at attention. Word had spread throughout the Pacific Fleet about what happened, about the Seahawk, about Webb's lies, about Carter's impossible rescue and his transmission from a dead submarine. But Carter didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who'd finally paid a debt, a man who'd kept a promise to his brother. As the submarine docked, he saw the honor guard waiting on the pier. Behind them, 73 flag-draped coffins arranged in perfect rows. The recovered bodies of the Seahawk's crew, brought up from the deep by Navy divers who'd worked around the clock. The bodies would be buried with full military honors. Their families would finally have closure. Their sacrifice would finally be recognized. And Webb? He'd been court-martialed aboard the Phantom during the return voyage. Stripped of rank, convicted of desertion, false testimony, and conduct unbecoming. He'd spend the rest of the war in a military prison, and probably years after that. But Carter took no satisfaction in that, because he understood something now, something his brother had taught him from beyond the grave. Survival wasn't about making it out alive. It was about what you did with the time you were given, the choices you made when everything was on the line, the promises you kept when keeping them meant sacrificing yourself. The Seahawk's crew had chosen to give Webb their oxygen, their rations, their chance at life. They'd chosen to spend their last hours documenting a minefield that threatened others. They'd chosen duty over survival. Webb had chosen to waste that gift on lies and self-preservation. Carter had chosen to go back, to finish what his brother started, to honor a promise to the dead by saving the living. 6 months ago, Carter had been known as Ironhand, the captain who never bent, who never broke, who made decisions and stuck to them no matter what. But now he knew the truth. Iron could bend. Iron could break. Iron was just metal. It was honor that was truly unbreakable, sacrifice that was truly eternal, love that truly transcended even death. That night, after the ceremonies, after the speeches, after the medals he didn't want and the promotions he didn't care about, Carter sat alone in his quarters. The lights of Pearl Harbor sparkled through the porthole like stars on water. He held Michael's logbook open to the final page, the last entry, written in increasingly shaky handwriting as the oxygen depleted. If William finds this, tell him, I was never alone. My crew was with me until the end. We died doing our duty, trying to save others. That's all any captain can ask for. That's all any brother can hope to be remembered for. Tell him I love him. Tell him not to grieve. We made our choice, and we'd make it again. Michael Carter closed the book and looked out at the dark ocean. Somewhere out there, in the crushing depths, the Seahawk still lay. But it wasn't a tomb anymore. It wasn't a monument to failure or tragedy. It was a testament to brotherhood, to sacrifice, to the men who went into the deep, knowing they might never come back, but who went anyway, because it was right. Captain William Ironhand Carter would never forget them. Neither would the 3,000 men they saved. Neither would history. The ocean keeps its secrets. It holds them tight in the crushing dark, where pressure and time erase almost everything. But sometimes, just sometimes, it gives one back. Not the secret itself, but the truth behind it, the meaning beneath the surface. This was one of those times. And as Carter sat in the darkness, he could have sworn he heard it one last time. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. 3 short taps, 3 long, 3 short. Not a cry for help anymore. A farewell, a thank you, a message from the deep that some promises once kept echo forever.